This is the Tactical Intellectual channel. Hold on. Hey guys, check this out first.
So I've been told, like we were having a conversation earlier, I've been told that they are Americans, Black Americans who are indigenous to America. So they have no roots to Africa. That's what I'm hearing. Most of them, they've been here since the beginning of time. Okay, cool. If I don't believe it, but that's just fine. My thing is, Ava mentioned on the show that she feels that Black people should take a test to know where they're from in Africa.
Why are you not African? You're just only American?
Yeah, I'm American.
Okay, explain.
So my most recent descendants are literally from Central America and North America, indigenous Black Americans. They have the same color, the same melanin content, but they are not from Africa. I can't name any country in Africa. If I take the ancestral test, yes, but a white person could take an ancestry test and have the same kind of results.
Right.
Like, what I'm saying is that if I take a test right now, I could say some Italian, some German, some Australian up in there, 13% Ghanaian, 19% Nigerian. Like, who knows and who cares? We all naturally, if we believe in Pangea, we all come from the African diaspora at some point. But what I'm saying is that my immediate ancestors are American.
Oh, yeah.
Mine.
So are they Black?
They're Black, but they're not African. It's a difference.
No, I'm not. Yeah, that's fine. But I guess my confusion is because you just said
never heard
everybody's.
this.
But initially, we all come from Africa.
Yeah, she just.
Are we
My
can
thing-
we?
my
That's the
thing-
confusion.
My thing with you guys is from like the whole thing about African booty scratchers, and even why Black Americans have been called African booty scratchers is because the white people have classified us all as coming from Africa because we're all Black, and that's where the whole like falsified information has come, where we all come from the Atlantic slave trade, and all the Black people were just shipped here to this country and all over. That's not true. We were already here. Like, we were already here, lining up every part of the world. But once, documents had to be falsified because, governments like their money and everything. Africans and slave chattel was money. So, that's the thing. But I'm saying I'm American. I don't know anybody from
So
Africa.
on applications for rental, for just any application that you apply for when they have the different races and ethnicities, you don't choose African American.
If that's the only option, if it's white, African American, or Spanish, of course I'm going to choose African American. I'm not white or Spanish. But if there's a different, like recently, they have a longer list.
They have.
So they would have Black American.
Yeah.
I would choose Black American. Like, I'm American. I was born here. My immediate ancestors from at least the past 10 generations have been from here. And I literally can see like my ancestors are what you guys would call indigenous or Native Americans, like Black.
So
They're Black.
Please, I want to just. I'm so sorry because I just want to make sure we're flowing. And I want to go back to you real quick. But before I go to her. So when you say 10 generations, do you know like exactly when? I'm just trying to get an idea.
Yeah, that's what he said. The timeline.
Like, is it like?
I could dig into it. Like, I gotta,
You
get in
can just-
contact with my grandma. She's still alive.
Like
thank God.
real brief, like
But-
is it like the 1600s or 1500s? Like
17 from what I
so pretty much we all come from
late
Africa then.
1700s.
Because I mean, you're from America, that's fine. I'm not saying you're not the case, but most of us or Africans or Black people, we all come from Africa before a certain time.
Everyone does.
Okay, so I think that's the confusion.
That's
But why
what
should
I'm saying.
Why
There's nothing
What
is wrong, but
timeline are
I'm
we
just
speaking
confused.
on? I think if we
I'm just
speak
trying to
on
get
the
my
timeline,
confusion
it'll be a
out the
little
way
bit
because I keep
easier
hearing different
to
things about
understand on both sides.
Blacks saying that they're indigenous to America. So I'm trying to understand, okay, for how long is
Can I
it
piggyback
like,
off what you're
I'm
saying?
just confused.
I think let's start with the time that continents were formed, right? So if what she's saying is true to some extent, because I don't agree with her, so I might be dumb. But if what you're saying is true, then you are more Hispanic or Asian than you are Black, because before the transatlantic slave trade, there was what they call Paleo-Indian, which those individuals.
No, and once again, you're misinformed, and that's
I
beautiful.
was about
that's
to.
nice.
I'm not saying that's the only people that were here, but
Yeah,
they
it's
have
not.
Paleo Indians, which the Aztec came from, which the Aztec, the Inca, those tribes came from what is called Asia to some extent, and then Spain came in, which was people were able to have Spanish and things like that.
So that was more than interesting, but I'm not gonna beat them up too bad because they really just don't know. Now, before I continue, I want to put the disclaimer out here. All of this is done in fair use. Let's take a moment and focus on the woman in the yellow dress. In my opinion, I do think she's holding her own. Now, the two women who are giving those inquiries to her, one thing you notice is they always want to know, hey, where are you really from? They ask that question just like that. Where are you really from? And of course, they are very skeptical of her answer. I haven't done my intro yet, but I want to give you guys the primers before you actually get into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, the heavy lifting of this video presentation. Before I get into my quasi reaction, check this video clip out of Adonis Live, the UK guy, the guy from New York that's living in the UK that interviews the Brits over there. Just listen to this type of conversation here, because it's definitely reminiscent to the one that you saw previously or before, just a while ago. And ask yourself if you pick up that same apprehension or skepticism that the two women had towards the woman in the yellow dress from the first video.
Black British culture.
Yeah.
A group of black people from Africa, Caribbean. It's like a group of people in those continents, those regions that are together within England, the UK.
Yeah.
That's what I'm gonna give as my
So
answer.
basically stealing other people's culture and putting a white man's label on it.
That's what you wanna say. That's what you wanna say. That's what. That's what. No. That's what it is.
You can't steal other people's culture and put the white man's label on it and call it Black British culture.
We didn't steal it. You're a part of it.
I'm not a part of it. I'm American. I'm American. I'm from New York.
So did you steal it when you went to America?
No, we created our own culture in America.
So what do you think we did?
No, but we don't.
You don't? That's
We
what
don't
I'm
have
saying.
it like America.
What did they have?
Americans, yeah. If you ask Americans where they're from, they would just say America.
Come. Good conversation.
Like they would say they're
Some of them say, some of them.
Where they originate from.
They just use
Hold on. Whoa, come closer. Hold on. What do you mean Americans don't understand where they come from?
You lot don't know your background.
Yes, we do.
No, you don't.
Yes, we
It's
do.
not like how
on social media it's portrayed like you don't.
Somebody asked you where you're from. What would you say?
I'm gonna say America.
Okay, so where are your parents from?
America.
Where were they born?
America.
They were born in America.
Yes, we're not immigrants. America. My great grandmother was born in
All of
America.
them are America. Where did you get your blackness from?
There were black Americans in America before Christopher Columbus came over and colonized America.
Yeah, and where did they get their blackness from?
America.
That's what I'm saying though. You don't know your
Black is not a monolith. Black is not a monolith. You think?
On social media, what we see in England is in America, black men don't know where they're from. They'll all say they're American. That's why he's saying, oh, you all just say you're American, because it's true. If someone asked me where I'm from randomly, he said, where are you from? I'm half Iranian, half Jamaican. I would say that out loud. I wouldn't say I'm British even though I
You're
was
half
born here.
Jamaican.
Yeah.
Where are you from?
Jamaica and Iran and Britain.
Hold on.
That's
No, exactly.
I'm British,
Exactly.
yeah.
No. You can't say that. You see how you, and this is where the ignorance comes into play. Hold on.
On social media, that's
Hold
what
on.
it looks like.
All right,
That's what it looks like.
but I'm gonna prove to you.
That's what I'm saying. It's not true, but I'm saying that's what it looks
I
like.
know, but
It might not be true, but that's what it looks
I'm
like.
gonna
That's what it
prove
looks
to you
like.
how the ignorance hits crazy. On the slave shit to Africa and Jamaica, you guys were in the same boat when it comes down to slavery itself. So when you sit down and say Jamaican, that's not a legitimate answer. You wanna know why you can only sit down and say that black Americans don't know where they're from? Because there's a
That
huge.
wasn't my statement. I just could say.
I know. All right. They want to know why you say that? I'm gonna tell you why you say that. It's because when we say Americans, the original Americans, you think of the Red Indians, right? Right? That's in your head, right?
Not necessarily.
The Native Americans,
Not necessarily.
the Red Indians. America reclassified the Indians as colored and Negro. So when you say they don't know where they came from, they literally reclassified all the Indians as colored and Negroes. So when you're thinking of the Native Americans, this is what they look like.
I just tried to the camera.
Yeah, but what we're saying is when we see interviews of black Americans and you're like, where are you from? They just say America. They don't say, I'm American and my parents are this or my ethnicity is this. They just say, that's what it looks like.
No, you want to know why? Because we didn't immigrate to America.
No,
We've been here.
In England, when you just ask us where we're from, we're going to tell you, we're born here, but our parents are from and our ethnicity is. And we don't see that on social media. That's why I said on social media. In America, if you ask a black man where they're from, they just say, we're American. That's what I see on socials, personally. But if you ask an English or a black British person, they'll say, I'm from England.
Because you're immigrants. Your bloodline are immigrants to this country. We didn't immigrate there. We created America.
Majority of
You
people
guys,
immigrate there, though.
who? Who immigrated? We did not immigrate to America.
You created America.
Yes.
Before that, what was there?
There were black Americans there. Who did they colonize? Like,
Have you done your DNA test?
DNA test does not confirm ethnicity. Genealogy does. I've done my genealogy.
Before that, how can you confirm that you was always there? Before that?
Because
before where you can confirm to
we
you?
literally have paperwork of black Americans.
Before that. Because there was still life before
Hold
that.
on, listen. The statement that he said that as I don't want to say. Hold on. Let me just clarify. Let's recap. Thank you. There's no country. In the 1700s, America was created. All right, it was founded.
They can't be from anywhere.
But then the British.
Who's it founded by?
America was the Brits.
The Brits, yeah.
Yeah, and they colonized.
And I already agreed. I already agreed for your point that you're making for yourself. I agree, but there's a lot of Americans that would say the same thing as you, but it's just not true. But can I say something? It's not just about, you're the only person that I've ever spoken to that has come and said, I can prove my lineage to a certain point. The rest of them, a lot of them cannot.
Because you want to know why? You want to know why?
Do it.
But you want to know why? It's because we don't have this conversation in America. You guys do.
You just said that you do.
No. We don't ask people where you really from.
All the facts, I'm just saying. As that comes across.
You lot don't know where you originated from. Wait. No, it still stands. Listen. Listen. Okay, let's say for instance, yeah.
Where you originate from?
Jamaica.
Yo, this is going viral.
We just had this convo.
All right, hold on. You're from Jamaica.
Where do you originate from?
Where originate
Africa. I don't know.
You think? Hold on. No,
where do
you
you
said
originate
you said you're from Jamaica.
Yeah.
Where did you originate from?
Is it a trick question, bro? I don't get it, bro. I actually don't get it.
You think that people originated from Jamaica?
No. You say Africa. We say Africa.
Where?
I don't know, man. I'm not.
Bro, what? Run it up! Run it up! Run it up!
Hey man, that Jamaican UK cat, he's a trip. But that was necessary though. Because realistically, us in the US, and it's really all the Americas, we in the same boat, man. But they just don't realize it. Now, I realize a lot of people don't know because the narrative is so strong worldwide. Doesn't matter where you at. Like I say, worldwide, the narrative is just that piercing. But me, I'm diplomatic. I'm not gonna denigrate these folks for not knowing. The only thing that I can do is try to unify everybody and spread facts, man. You know, it's up to you if you want to accept the facts. But my thing is, I just say, weigh the facts. Do your weight and balances, man. Basically mean verify the facts right there to see if it holds up, if everything lines up. Yo, I haven't done my intro yet. Let me get into my intro right quick. Now, finally, welcome to the channel, this tactical intellectual channel. We're about to check out a presentation or video from Above the Clouds on this video here, entitled The First Americans, the First Israelites, and the African World Civilization. We're definitely going to focus on the first Americans or the Paleo Americans. That's the subject matter here. And let's go ahead and go into the video presentation, and I'll chime in whenever I see something that piques my interest here. All right, may it be enjoyable for you guys.
These African migrations into the Americas far predating the much later Mongoloid migrations into the Americas around 13,000 years ago. These Africans were living in the Americas before Mongoloid people even existed.
Take note of that fact. He's speaking factuals, and it's successive facts on top of facts. But check this one out. Sunderland.
Just as huge landmasses connected Australia and Papua New Guinea and many of the islands of South Asia and Australo-Melanesia during the Paleolithic, a land bridge connected Asia to the Americas. This land bridge was known as Beringia. These first African pioneers would cross Beringia and enter into these new untouched virgin lands, becoming the first Americans. These early Americans who migrated from Africa are best described as Paleo-African Americans.
Just call them Paleo Americans, man.
And like Oma 1 or Kafsa or many modern or ancient Australo-Melanesians or modern or ancient sub-Saharan Africans, these early Paleo-Americans had the same ancestral African or Negroid phenotype. Thus, all early skulls in the Americas are overwhelmingly African. This has been well studied and well documented for decades, many having a very clearly Negroid or Africoid morphology. The Africanity of these early skulls and ancient remains serving as unequivocal evidence for the early populating of the Americas by African peoples over 50,000 years ago and during the initial out of Africa migration. This is Luzia, dated to 11,500 years ago, and like all Paleo-Indians, she has that distinctive Negroid or Africoid phenotype. Her remains were found in a cave in Brazil, where we happen to find large amounts of these early Negroid or African Paleo-Indians.
All right, so I know a lot of people are looking at this with great skepticism, but you gotta look at the facts, man, before you come to a final determination.
This is Apiuna. This gentleman's remains are over 10,000 years old, found in Lagoa Santa, Brazil, just like Luzia. And like Luzia, he has that typical African or Negroid phenotype, which was common amongst the first Americans. To quote Nevis, in this study, we compare the cranial morphology of several late Paleo-Indian skeletons uncovered at Santana de Riacho, central Brazil, with worldwide human cranial variation. Malinobis distance and principal component analysis are used to explore the extracontinental morphological affinities with the Brazilian Paleo-Indian sample. Santana de Riacho is a late Paleo-Indian burial site where approximately 40 individuals were recovered in varying states of preservation. The site is located at Lagoa Santa. The first human activities in this rock shelter date back to the terminal Pleistocene, but the burials are bracketed between circa 8,200 years ago and 9,500 years ago. The collection contains only 6 skulls well enough preserved to be measured. The Santana de Riacho late Paleo-Indians present a cranial morphology characterized by long and narrow neurocrania, long and narrow faces with low nasal apertures and orbits. The multivariate analysis showed that they exhibit strong morphological affinities with present-day Australians and Africans, showing no resemblance to recent Northern Asians and Native Americans.
That's the key right there, man. These people were closer to like Africans first, then Melanesians second, because that's where they, the route that they migrated to out of Africa, then the Melanesian Sundaland area, then Australia, the Aboriginal Australians, then finally that. So what did I mention before? I had talked about the time of, let me see something right quick. Yeah, I had mentioned the divergence times. So that's something that you really have to consider and take note of. Don't ignore, because group A and group B could be similar, but at a certain time, with all these mutations occurring and just different lifestyles, that they do diverge. That's a real thing.
These findings confirm our long-held opinion that the settlement of the Americas was more complicated in terms of biological input than has been widely assumed. The working hypothesis is that 2 very distinct populations entered the New World by the end of the Pleistocene, and that the transition between the cranial morphology of the Paleo-Indians and the morphology of later Native Americans, which occurred around 8,000 to 9,000 years ago, was abrupt. This, in our opinion, is a more parsimonious explanation for the diversity detected than a long local microevolutionary process mediated by selection and drift. The similarities of the first South Americans with sub-Saharan Africans may result from the fact that the non-Mongoloid Southeast Asian ancestral population came ultimately from Africa, with no major modification in the original cranial plan of the first modern humans. It is recognized that the human population that arrived in Australia around 50,000 years ago was the product of an expansive movement out of Africa. Following the tropical areas of southern Asia, this route of expansion represents one of the first offshoots of modern humans out of Africa. This is why Australians and Africans still form a superpopulation unit of morphological affinity. Therefore, the similarities of the first South Americans with Australians are easily explained if we accept that both populations shared a common ancestral population in mainland East Asia, most probably Southeast Asia. A population expansion from Asia to the New World before the Mongoloid traits were fully developed in the Old World was actually predicted more than 50 years ago by Birdsell in 1951.
All right, so that just shows you that this information that I'm showcasing here is not new. It's old information, but for some reason, a lot of people that are higher up, the higher anthropologists, the whatever field of study they're in, they decided to turn their back on this information and present, I guess, the image of themselves or create a narrative and show anything but the answer or the proof that was staring them in the face at that time, if you know what I mean.
The similarities of the first South Americans with sub-Saharan Africans may result from the fact that the non-Mongoloid Southeast Asian ancestral population came ultimately from Africa, with no major modification in the original cranial plan of the first moderns. Nevis et al. Have already suggested a possible historical connection among early modern humans, Skull and Kafsa in Israel, UC 101, Paleo-Indians, and recent Africans and Australians, based on their cranial morphology.
And it's very interesting because they didn't just swiftly come from Africa. They made several very, very long stops in their trek towards the Americas. Some groups broke off. Like when you look at current day Aboriginals, the original Aboriginals, say that 3 times as fast. And then people in South India, there's a big time similarity there. And then we already know about Asia, East Asia, and then the Andaman Island people, the Negritos and everyone. So, I mean, this is nothing new. Oh yeah, my main point was that they didn't make a swift excursion from Africa to the Americas, but they could have been in India for millennia, then finally in Australia for millennia before deciding to trek to the Americas. So it's not anything dealing with a low image of self. Let's just be truthful here. I mean, this is logical stuff. It's not a inferiority complex, because like I say, this platform and myself, really, I don't deal with inferiority complexes. Gotta look at what makes sense and facts, evidence, logical conclusions, and all of that stuff. All right, enough of me talking.
These early African migrants peopling the Americas tens of thousands of years before the much later Mongoloid migrations from Siberia and Northeast Asia, around 13,000 years ago.
All native peoples in South and North America belong to a racial type known as Mongoloid. They're descended from the ancient peoples of Siberia. During the Ice Age, 12,000 years ago, there was a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. Mongoloid peoples were the first to enter the New World, or so experts thought. The Brazilian finds point to a very different story of the discovery of the Americas. The paintings on these rock shelters are much older than the Indians. Here, hunters chased giant armadillos, an animal that flourished during the Ice Age long before the arrival of the Indians. There's a playful feel to many of the scenes. Here, a group of men are standing on each other's shoulders, just like a circus act. And here, a rare romantic moment. The scenes conjure up a lost world of innocence. How long ago was this primeval paradise? French archaeologists have just finished digging in Pedra Furada, the largest of the rock shelters.
All right, so for the detractors and for people who really want to take in the knowledge, remember the names of these archaeologists. Remember the names of these archaeologists and anthropologists and other people. And remember the works that they put out, the peer-reviewed articles that they wrote. So that helps to just minimize your level of skepticism. And, you know, this is all new information. I mean, well, it's old information, but we're presenting it more ferociously than in the past because, you know, it pertains to us, really. So, I mean, verify everything that you're hearing and just go from there.
Their aim was to go back in time to a period well before the arrival of American Indians. Every foot they dug took them thousands of years back into prehistory. When they reached layers 40,000 years old, they found these. Pieces of quartzite that look remarkably like stone tools. The edges on one side of the stones were flaked off.
Yeah, I apologize about the quality. If I can find these actual videos that he showcased within his own video presentation, I will try to link it in my description.
Were these stones shaped into cutting tools by human hands? If so, then the history of the discovery of the Americas would have to be rewritten. But if people had been here before the American Indians, surely there would be other traces of their presence. The archaeologists continued to dig, down to depths 50,000 years old. And then they found this. Fragments of animal bone and charcoal. For Anne-Marie Passy, one of the archaeologists involved in the dig, these fragments were proof of human occupation.
We
found structures shaped like hearths. Next to the charcoal, depending on the period, we sometimes found food leftovers of animals they may have eaten.
The Brazilian finds show that the New World was discovered tens of thousands of years earlier than previously believed, certainly well before the time of the American Indians. But who were these pioneers? A much earlier wave of Mongoloids, or another race altogether? Clues to the identity of the first Americans are emerging in rock shelters in the northeast and southeast of Brazil. archaeologists there have recently unearthed human remains.
It's about to get really good, so just pay attention. You know, break your notebook out, take some screenshots. Hey, it's about to get really good.
Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil 9 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He has been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
91.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we start running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing these people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing these people as anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That, to me, is a Negroid face. It has all the features you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being a Mongoloid.
Luthia belongs to a race found historically along the rim of the Indian Ocean, in East Africa, in the islands of South Asia, and in Australia and Melanesia. Was this then the face of a first American? Her reconstruction is confirmed by measurements Walter Neves has taken of all his skulls.
The first reaction was not to believe in it. But as the results, repeated so many times, and the result is exactly the same thing. They are very similar to nowadays Aborigines and Africans, and no similarity at all with Mongoloids in Asia or with American Indians.
I I can hear it now, man. Yo, but why she gotta be black? You don't know that? You don't know that? And I'm gonna put up something after this reaction or quasi-reaction of the Hybris-Plex tool that they use to predict skin color, hair color, eye color, and all of that stuff. So you're gonna learn today if you are a detractor, and if you just want to learn and you are in good faith, then this is something that you have to know.
But how could Luthia be African and Australian? According to Walter Nevis, there's a very simple explanation. Luthia is a bit of both. The first humans originated in Africa. It's known that around 100,000 years ago, waves of people migrated out of Africa. One such wave went east, and 60,000 years ago, it reached Australia. Luthia, it seems, belonged to a race of humans descended from Africans, a race that eventually became today's Australian Aborigines. At the southernmost end of the continent lies Tierra del Fuego, a group of islands isolated from the mainland by the Strait of Magellan. The oldest skull found in this part of the world is 9,000 years old. It too was measured by Walter Nevis.
91.
This skull also shows a strong similarity with Australians and no similarity at all with nowadays Indians or Mongoloids. Okay, so even in the extreme southern cone of the Americas, okay, was inhabited by these people that has nothing to do with Mongoloids.
Thus, these early Africans that first populated Australia and Melanesia would also go on to populate the Americas as well, bringing with them that ancestral African phenotype. To quote Nevis, increasing skeletal evidence from the USA, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil strongly suggests that the first settlers in the Americas had a cranial morphology distinct from that displayed by most late and modern Native Americans. The Paleo-American morphological pattern is more generalized and can be seen today among Africans, Australians, and Melanesians. Here we present the result of a comparative morphological assessment of a late Paleo-Indian early archaic specimen from Capilina Burial 2, southern Brazil. The Capilina skull was compared with samples of 4 Paleo-Indian groups from South and Central America and worldwide modern groups from W. W. Howell's studies. In both analyses performed, classical morphometrics and geometric morphometrics, the results show a clear association between Capilino Burial 2 and the Paleo-Indians, as well as Australians, Melanesians, and Africans, confirming its Paleo-American status.
All right. So you see up here, okay, skeletal evidence from the USA, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, but USA right there. So all the FBA guys, hey, you're valid, you're verified. But it's kind of really not about that either. It's coming to an understanding. All this chest beating, hey, it's about coming to an understanding, respecting one another and everything. But then look at this. So how would I rank like who's number 1, 2, 3, and 4? Like I say, you gotta go with the continent first. I mean, y'all can have that spot, but then Melanesians, Australians, then Paleo-Indians. Now we have an element that's not even on here yet, but we'll speak about them later on. You know who it is: Europe, Asia. But basically, yeah, these are the worldwide melanated people right here. So the FBA folks, Paleo-Indian status, okay?
The increasing evidence that all late Pleistocene and early Holocene human groups from South America are characteristically non-Mongoloid has major implications for the colonization of the Americas, as argued by one of us since the end of the 1980s. Even if few studies with large samples from single sites have been carried out so far with Paleo-Indians, it is evident by now that South America, Central America, and possibly North America were populated by human groups with a more generalized cranial morphology before the arrival of the Mongoloids.
All right, so all of this stuff is studies that were going on during the 1980s right there. And the information's, I mean, come on, man. But still, you have depictions, you have stories, you have a narrative that is being upheld. Even to our day, you got people that get upset and want to put hands on you if you want to speak these type of facts that you're learning right now. So let's go ahead and move forward.
Since this more generalized morphology, Australo-Melanesian-like, was also present in East Asia at the end of the Pleistocene, transoceanic migrations are not necessary to explain our findings. As presented in detail elsewhere, the arrival of an Australo-Melanesian-like population in the Americas is easily accommodated under what is presently known about the place of origin and the routes taken by modern humans in their first long-distance dispersions. Accordingly, a population that began to expand from Africa around 70,000 years ago reached Southeast Asia by the middle of the late Pleistocene, carrying with it a cranial morphology characterized by long, narrow neurocrania and narrow projecting faces. We postulate that after reaching Southeast Asia, this stem population gave rise to at least two different dispersions. One took a southward direction and arrived at Australia around 50,000 years ago. Sometime between 50,000 and 20,000 years ago, a second branch dispersed towards the north and arrived in the Americas by the end of the Pleistocene, bringing with it the same cranial morphology that characterized the first modern humans. When the classical Mongoloid cranial morphology appeared in northeastern Asia, either as a local response to extreme environmental conditions or as the product of a migration from northern Europe, a new expansion of northern Asians reached the New World, bringing with it a cranial morphology characterized by short, wide neurocrania and broad, retracted faces. These observations of early African migration into the Americas has also been further validated by ancient African genetics found throughout groups of Amerindians in Southern America, specifically in Brazil. These groups having ancient African ancestry, linking them to the founding populations of the Australian Aborigines, Andaman Islanders, and Papua New Guineans. To quote Skoklund, genetic studies have consistently indicated a single common origin of Native American groups from Central and South America. However, some morphological studies have suggested a more complex picture whereby the Northeast Asian affinities of present-day Native Americans contrast with a distinctive morphology seen in some of the earliest American skeletons, which share traits with present-day Australians, indigenous groups in Australia, Melanesia, and islands of Southeast Asia. Here we analyze genome-wide data to show that some Amazonian Native Americans descend partly from a Native American founding population that carried ancestry more closely related to indigenous Australians, New Guineans, and Andaman Islanders than to any present-day Eurasians or Native Americans. We have shown that a population Y that had ancestry from a lineage more closely related to present-day Australo-Melanesians than to present-day East Asians and Siberians likely contributed to the DNA of Native Americans from Amazonia and the central Brazilian plateau. This discovery is striking in light of interpretations of the morphology of some early Native American skeletons, which some authors have suggested have affinities to Australo-Melanesian groups. The largest number of skeletons that have been described as having this craniofacial morphology, and that date to younger than 10,000 years ago, have been found in Brazil, home of the Serui, Caritiana, and Zavante groups, who show the strongest affinity to Australo-Melanesians in genetic data. An open question is when and how population-wide ancestry reached South America. There are several archaeological sites in the Americas that are contemporary to or earlier than Clovis sites. The fact that one individual from a Clovis context who has yielded ancient DNA had entirely first American ancestry suggests the possibility that population-wide ancestry may be found in non-Clovis sites. Regardless of the archaeological associations, our results suggest that the genetic ancestry of Native Americans from Central and South America cannot be due to a single pulse of migration south of the late Pleistocene ice sheets from a homogeneous source population, and instead must reflect at least two streams of migration, or alternatively a long drawn-out period of gene flow from a structured Beringian or Northeast Asian source. The arrival of population-wide ancestry in the Americas must in any scenario have been ancient. While population-Y shows a distant genetic affinity to Andamanese, Australian, and New Guinean populations, it is not particularly closely related to any of them, suggesting that the source of population Y in Eurasia no longer exists. Furthermore, we detect no long-range admixture linkage disequilibrium in Amazonians as would be expected if the population Y migration had occurred within the last few thousand years. It should be understood when Skoklin says, while population Y shows a distant genetic affinity to Andamanese, Australians, and New Guinean populations, it is not particularly closely related to any of them, suggesting that the source of population Y in Eurasia no longer exists? This is because Papua New Guineans or Andaman Islanders or Australian Aborigines didn't travel to the Americas to populate it. The signal they're detecting is African genetics. The signal is of the African ancestors of the Papuans, Onge, and Australian Aborigines. It's the original African populations that first populated Australia, Melanesia, and the Andaman Islands, and of course the Americas as well. This population Y were the original African migrants of South Asia and Australo-Melanesia. All of these places, whether it be Australo-Melanesia or the Americas, were first populated by Africans during that initial out-of-Africa migration over 50,000 years ago. Another piece of genetic evidence that incontrovertibly connects Africa to the Americas is the presence of HTLV1, also known as human T-cell lymphotropic virus 1. This virus and its genetically inherited SNPs, or antigen alleles, namely HLA-A26 and HLA-A36, both originate in Western Central Africa. This disease has a particular transmission methodology. It can only be transferred through cell-to-cell transmission, usually being passed primarily from mother to child through breast milk or from male to female through semen and sexual intercourse. As stated before, this virus originates in Western Central Africa, where its greatest diversity and oldest strains can be found, as well as the hereditary antigen alleles associated with it. As we can see, all HLA alleles, which now have a worldwide distribution, can be found in Western Central Africa, where they first originated over 75,000 years ago. Today, HTLV1 has a worldwide distribution, but its most endemic areas are where human beings have lived the longest, namely Western Central Africa, where the virus originates, and South Asia and Austromelanesia, as well as the Americas, some of the first places populated by peoples out of Africa, being found in high frequency amongst the indigenous Australian Aborigines, Melanesians, and Japanese. Japan having the highest frequency of HTLV1 outside of Africa. This may be due to the fact that the Japanese are descended from ancient Western Central Africans bearing Y chromosome haplogroup D. And lastly, it is found in very high frequency in the Americas, namely in Brazil and South America. The indigenous tribes of Brazil also have a very rare and particular strain of human T-cell lymphotropic virus known as HTLV2. This version of HTLV has its origin amongst the pygmies of Western Central Africa. This transcontinental diffusion of HTLV1 and HTLV2 not only brought these African viruses into the Americas, but their respective antigen alleles as well. To quote Sonoda, the serological surveillance revealed transcontinental dispersal of HTLV1 in the prehistoric era that started out of Africa, spread to Austromelanesia and the Asian continent, then moved to North America, and through to the southern edge of South America. This was highlighted by an Andean mummy study that proved ancient migration of Paleo-Mongoloid HTLV1 from Asia to South America. transcontinental dispersal of HTLV-1 with human migration. Human T-cell lymphotropic virus type 1 is transmissible from mother to infants through breast milk, from male to female through semen, and to blood recipients through HTLV-1 carriers' lymphocytes. All the transmission routes effectively localize HTLV-1 infection foci within particular family ethnic groups. Efficacy of vertical transmission of HTLV-1 was confirmed by recent studies of HLA concordance between mothers and infants, likely mediated by either immunological or virological synapse of HTLV-1 infected T cells. Thus, serological and virological surveillance allowed location of HTLV-1 positive ethnic groups across the world, as depicted in Figure 1. By virtue of the genomic stability of HTLV-1, we could trace the transcontinental dispersal by phylogenetic relationships of viral isolates from various ethnic groups. The early transmission of HTLV-1 to South America was highlighted by the discovery of ancient HTLV-1 DNA preserved within an Andean mummy. The mummy was buried 1,500 years ago in the desert of Atacama, northern Chile, and the body was kept intact in the dry climate with salty and alkaline soil. When bone marrow samples of mummy femur were processed to extract DNA by a glass meal method, followed by PCR amplification of HTLV-1 DNA, nucleotide sequences of the mummy's HTLV-1 tags and LTR DNA were very similar to HTLV-1 isolated from the contemporary Atacama tribe and the nearest neighbor of Chilean indigenous people. Of particular interest, they were closely related to the HTLV-1 of Ainu, southern Japanese. The transcontinental migration of HTLV-1 was supported by studies showing two lineages of HLA-A alleles in association with HTLV-1 endemic populations in the world, one being HLA-A26 and the other HLA-A36, and both originally evolving in African blacks, and then becoming dispersed to Melanesians, Israeli Jews, Asian Indians, Southwestern Japanese, Sakharan natives, and North and South Amerindians, and today carried by Caribbean South American black peoples. It is likely that ancient HTLV-1 passing peoples in Africa moved to the Asian continent, then passed the Bering Strait to North America, and further to the southern edge of South America, as depicted in Figure 5. Thus, both the anthropological evidence showing the clear African or Negroid morphology of early Paleo-Americans, as well as the genetic evidence connecting the Americas with the early African populations that would become the Australians, Melanesians, and other South Asian groups, as well as the endemic nature of not only HTLV-1, but also the much more rare HTLV-2, as well as their ancestral African antigen alleles, all overwhelmingly support the idea of the early peopling of the Americas by populations of Africans during the initial out-of-Africa migration. To quote Kanzaki, based on recent serological detection, isolation, and characterization of HTLV-3 and HTLV-4 among African populations in Central Africa, and additional unrefutable evidence of early human migration from Africa and Australia to the American continent previous to Asiatic population migration lead us to hypothesize that human descendants of mixed Americans and Africans or remaining Africans explain the very frequent presence of Western blot indeterminate results for HTLV-1 and 2 that we and other groups have been detecting, and also the unusual absence of HTLV-2 infection among some relatively homogeneous ethnic native human populations in the American continent. According to different authors, during the Pleistocene-Holocene transition period, at least two different human populations migrated to the American continent. Cranial anatomic analysis recognized two peculiar human morphologic patterns related to Asiatics and Africans. So, contrary to the common sense, one of these groups, the Asiatics, were not the first human groups to migrate to the American continent, but the African group, probably coming from Oceania and or Africa. Confirming these findings, Nevis et al. Emphasizes that the colonization of the New World occurred by two distinct succeeding biological populations, an early one with a cranial morphology similar to that found today in the African and Australian continents, and a later one with a morphology similar to that found today among northeastern Asians.
All right, so before I let them continue, so you got the facts that Asians were not the first ones, or Mongoloids were not the first ones, but it was that early OOA out of Africa migration. And it's crazy because in future videos, I'm definitely gonna tie it up and fix it up more neatly. But basically, you had these descendants, the descendants of the Paleo Americans, who are basically close to Melanesians, Australasians, or Australo-Melanesians, and Africans, that they've been here for millennia, thousands of years. So, I had mentioned the divergence time, and basically, when you look at the divergence time, okay, these early Paleo Americans, their descendants, and then what's going on in Africa? They diverged, they became distinct. So these melanated American Indians, if you want to put it like that, over, say 2 millennia pass, okay, so then they start trading with the people that's on the continent of Africa. So they see themselves, they recognize they got some similarities, but the culture is different. Come on, the fact that I have to explain this is kind of wild, but they're different people now. They're looked at as like second cousins now, third cousins, fourth cousins, because that divergence time does that to you. I don't want to get too deep into this subject, but you guys gotta understand the facts first.
Evis et al. Also have been finding increasing skeletal evidence from USA, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil, strongly suggesting that the first settlers in the Americas had a cranial morphology distinct from that displayed by most late and modern Native Americans. Based on these research results and our unusual findings of HTLV-1 infection among Amazonian Amerindians and indeterminate Western blot profiles, we hypothesized that early human populations, the Austro-Melanesians and Africans, colonized the American continent 12,000 to 35,000 years in the past, previous to the migration of Asian populations. So not only do genetics support the early peopling of the Americas by Africans during the initial out-of-Africa migration, but the anthropological record as well. All Paleo-Indians possessing that distinctive African or Negroid skeletal morphology. This early populating of the Americas is also supported by the actual archaeological record of the Americas. For a long period of time, it was suggested that people only arrived in the Americas about 14,000 years ago. These were the Clovis people, and these were Mongoloid people from northern Asia, who entered into America at the end of the Ice Age and the last glacial maximum. This limited view of American history has been thoroughly destroyed, the Clovis first model being completely destroyed over the last several years, as several finds have refuted the idea of Clovis first. Several sites have been found throughout the Americas dating to 30,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. And it should be understood that most sites that were dated before Clovis were always met with intense and often acrimonious scrutiny and criticism from many North American archaeologists. This is largely due to the African or Negroid skeletal morphology of all early Paleo-American remains. Of course, the idea of Africans being the first people in the Americas is off-putting to a lot of people with racial biases and in the field of archaeology, even if they're supposed to be impartial and non-biased professionals. The idea of race and the Africanity of the first peoples of the Americas is the unspoken elephant in the room in modern American archaeology. Prior to the last several years, anyone that suggested a site was older than Clovis in the Americas was met with harsh, illogical, and acrimonious arguments. All of this to try to maintain that Clovis first model. But it should be noted that South American archaeologists and even many European archaeologists have historically had none of this racial bias, and for decades have had no problem whatsoever seeing that the first people in the Americas were Africans. They've in fact been saying this For decades, simply being honest and just following the archaeology and the evidence, being genuine and professional scholars. One of the oldest sites showing very clear and early evidence of people living in the Americas far before Clovis is the site of Serra de Capivara, of course found in Brazil. These paintings dated back to over 30,000 years, while occupation at this site and nearby sites go back as far as 100,000 years.
Man was here 100,000 years ago. We think that probably they came from Africa. The currents and the wind came from Africa till here.
This is Simon Romero for the New York Times in the Serra da Capivara National Park. Here, in the forbidding thorn forests of Brazil's Piauí state, archaeologists say their discoveries are contributing to a pivotal reevaluation of how humans first came to the Americas. What archaeologists are finding here at this incredibly remote site is evidence of human habitation going back tens of thousands of years, which totally upends previous theories of human migration across the Bering Strait, across North America, across the Amazon rainforest, and into this part of Brazil.
Today we have 945 sites with rock art.
French-Brazilian archaeologist Dr. Nied Guidon has overseen digs here since the 70s. New findings throughout the hemisphere are upending the Clovis first theory, a prevailing belief of 20th century archaeology in the United States that humans began arriving in the Americas about 13,000 years ago. The research in Brazil is trying to determine how early lands empty of humankind were settled.
They have these structures to make fire. We took samples of the stones that were heated by the fire, and it was possible to date by a thermoluminescence to 100,000 years.
A beríngia, só como ponte biogeográfica para se atravessar, para que os grupos humanos atravessassem da Ásia para a América, provavelmente não foi a única ponte nem num único período.
Dr. Guidon's assertion that humans lived here 100,000 years ago has not been widely embraced. But research up and down the Americas increasingly reveals signs of human habitation long before Clovis hunters began appearing. Dr. Guidon first came to Piauí to study the rock art left by ancient people. Excavating beneath these striking paintings, she says she found stone tools and remnants of ancient fires. Archaeologists have also unearthed more recent burial sites and fossils of extinct megafauna like giant sloths and saber-toothed cats. Critics dispute some of their findings, claiming that sharpened stones could have been made as the result of rockfall or by monkeys. But the researchers here say the stones show clear evidence of human craftsmanship.
Peças que teve a sua quebra pelo que a gente chama de aquecimento, ela vai ficar bem côncava e bem convexa. A outra parte sem orientação de retirada. Quando antrópica, não, quase sempre você vai conseguir orientar exatamente de onde foi feita a retirada.
Dr. Guidon is now retired from active research, but teams of Brazilian and European archaeologists continue the work she began at a world-class institute and museum she founded here. In 2013, a French-led team published findings placing the human presence in Piauí as far back as 22,000 years. As scholars advance beyond Clovis first, this region, long mired in poverty, is now emerging as a flashpoint for research and discovery.
One of the oldest sites showing a clear presence of peoples in the Americas at a very early date is the Cerruti Mastodon site, date it to over 100,000 years ago. And this is not too surprising. As we know, the peoples of Papua New Guinea in part descend from a much earlier wave of modern humans out of Africa, dating back as much as 120,000 years ago.
In November 1992, paleontologists from the San Diego Natural History Museum were conducting routine monitoring of a construction site on State Route 54 here in San Diego, when field paleontologist Richard Cerruti spotted several fossil bones and portions of a tusk. It took 22 years to piece the story of these fossils together, and the picture it reveals just might change everything. As Cerruti explored the site with Dr. Tom Demaray, they found fragments of distinctive molars showing that they had discovered the bones of a mastodon. But something was puzzling. Many of the bones were strangely fractured or missing entirely, and there were several large stones that seemed out of place in the surrounding fine-grained sediments. To Richard, this was starting to look not like a paleontological site or a fossil site, but instead like an archaeological site, like the preserved evidence of human activity.
All right, so we already know what's going on at this Cerruti or Cerruti mastodon site. If it's Italian, it's Cerruti. All right, I'm just showing off right there, but pay attention closely.
As work on the site continued, questions about its age remained unanswered. At the time, the oldest evidence of humans living in North America came from sites that are around 14,000 years old. But mounting evidence suggested this site was much older, possibly dating to long before any humans were thought to have arrived on the continent. The first step to solving this riddle was to confirm that the site was, in fact, an archaeological site. Dr. Steve Holen had the expertise to help. Using the femur bones of recently deceased elephants, Holen had conducted 2 separate experiments in which he demonstrated that a stone used as a hammer causes fresh limb bones to fracture in a distinctive way. No known geological process or animal scavenging produces the same fractures in bones. In 2008, when Holen first traveled to San Diego to study these specimens, he confirmed the same breakage patterns. Furthermore, the San Diego site had 5 large rocks that could have been used to produce the breakage. The broken bones were concentrated in 2 separate clusters, each around 1 rock. The other large rocks lay nearby. Could these have been used as tools? To help answer this question, the team consulted Dr. Richard Fulliger, an expert in use-wear features on stone tools. Richard compared the impact and wear marks on the stones found at the San Diego site with other stone tools. Sure enough, the large stones showed the same abrasions, fractures, and scars that only occur on stones used as hammerstones and anvils. No known geological process produces the same patterns of wear. A clear picture was starting to emerge of 2 distinct areas where early humans were using rocks to break bones and teeth. But couldn't a flood or other event have rearranged the rocks and bones? Holen, who has studied sites where this happened, says no. At other sites, gravity sorted bones by density and size. This wasn't the case here, where everything from small molar fragments to large rocks were distributed, unsorted, around the site. The researchers were unanimous. They had uncovered an archaeological site containing portions of an extinct mastodon. But a critical question still remained unanswered. How old was the site? In 2011, almost 2 decades after the mastodon's discovery, advances in technology provided the answer the team was looking for. Tom Demaray sent several of the mastodon bones to Jim Pacey's, who used state-of-the-art radiometric dating methods to determine their age. The mastodon bones, which were still fresh when broken with stone tools, were around 130,000 years old. What does this mean? It means that early humans were living in North America at least 115,000 years earlier than previously thought. This site's discovery reframes our understanding of when humans first arrived on this continent. It also raises as many questions as it answers. Who were the humans at work at this site, and how did they reach North America? Were they an early, failed attempt to colonize a new part of the world? Where are the other sites that show human activity in North America that are as old as this one? Where else should scientists look for evidence? Asking questions is at the heart of scientific discovery. Science is always seeking the best explanation that fits the evidence when new information is uncovered, no matter what we thought was true before. Fossils tell stories. This is not the end of this story, but simply the beginning.
As I said, sites like these have recently destroyed the much-espoused Clovis first model, which posited that Mongoloid peoples from North Asia were the first in the Americas. This model being completely destroyed, as new sites showing much older occupation are being found every year. Not surprisingly, one of the most recent finds is in Santa Helena in central Brazil, home of Apayuna and Luzia, and countless other Negroid or African Paleo-Americans. This site dates back to 27,000 years ago. Here we find the oldest jewelry in the Americas, 3 finely polished and sculpted osteoderms of a giant ground sloth. These beautifully shaped pendants would have been worn around the neck as jewelry by these early Paleo-Indians, almost 30,000 years ago. These finely shaped pieces of jewelry being the oldest jewelry ever found in the Americas. Multiple multidisciplinary tests were run on these artifacts to verify that these osteoderms were indeed created and modified by humans and not the result of fleas, rats, or other natural processes. These pieces of bone showing clear signs of intentional drilling and sculpting. And not surprisingly, even more evidence of early man has been found in South America. These butchered remains of megafauna go back over 21,000 years and are found in the Pompeian region of Argentina.
Fossil bones found in Argentina with cut marks suggestive of butchering indicate humans were present in southern South America some 21,000 years ago, according to researchers. That's earlier than previously thought. The bones were from a large armadillo relative unearthed in 2015 in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area. A study on the finding was published on Wednesday. Here's anthropologist and study lead author Mariano del Papa.
The marks we found are linear with no more specifications. A detailed analysis led us determine these were marks of cuts, and the only ones who could make them are human beings. They are not marks of stamping from other animals, not rodents or bites of carnivores. Another evidence we found is that these bones had not been disjoined, as they preserved their natural joints.
The researchers said the cut marks on the bone appear to have been made by people using stone tools, though no human fossils were found at the site. Cut marks were found on the pelvis, tail, and body armor of the specimen. The timeline for the peopling of the Americas has been a matter of debate. The new findings represent the oldest evidence of both the presence of Homo sapiens and human interaction with large animals in southern South America during the height of the last ice age, researchers said.
But perhaps the most landmark site found to date is the site of White Sands, New Mexico, which possesses the fossilized footprints of human beings and megafauna living side by side from over 23,000 years ago. This site drastically pushed back the presence of humans in the Americas, giving incontrovertible proof of the early peopling of the Americas during the initial out-of-Africa migration and before the onset of the last glacial maximum. This site serving as the final nail in the coffin for the Clovis first model.
The vast and dry gypsum landscape in what is now New Mexico was once a giant lake. Archaeologists began digging through the layers of sediment laid down over tens of thousands of years, and then, clear as day, they came upon this: fossilized human footprints. Carbon dating of ancient seeds found among the footprints suggested a time long before it was thought possible. More testing of more layers confirmed the footprints were children walking by an ancient lake almost 10,000 years before we thought humans had arrived in North America.
Radiocarbon dating with a very high degree of certainty, and we were astounded at just how old they turned out to be.
In Africa, skulls of Homo sapiens date earlier than 100,000 years ago. From there, great migrations began, first through the Middle East to South Asia, and later to Australia and to Europe, 40 to 50,000 years ago. More recently, humans crossed over what was then a land bridge that existed between Siberia and North America. It was believed they came only after the glaciers of the last ice age had begun to recede around 13,000 years ago. The new footprint suggests humans came before the ice-blocked migration and came to the southwestern U.S. up to 23,000 years ago.
This discovery is pretty staggering because it says people were actually here before those routes closed up.
It's believed the early humans in North America would have coexisted with mastodons and other primitive species. They may well have been the forebears of the indigenous people in the Americas, and the study suggests an early society existed here for at least 2,000 years.
You know, it's kind of funny that growing up in our compulsory education, school days, that we really just go off and learn about narrative rather than these old facts. I'm in the U.S. here, and we already know that it's a racial issue that they have. They don't empower these guys. So empower anybody else but them. Hey, the Department of Education may be dismantled, but in our minds, we have to take in the correct information, man. We have to overcome this stuff, man. Melanated folks, that is. If you want to go along with narrative and live your life with that, then by all means, go ahead. But hey, the true information, I guess in their opinion, the Palito and everybody else who's not melanated, I want to say that the true information is probably Pandora's box to them, but it is what it is.
You can just kind of picture the kids. It's like, oh, let's go down, play by the lake. Or their parents say, go get some water. It's just like step, 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 step. These little glimpses of activity and interaction over time are just fascinating to me.
Scientists say future research should focus on even older, undisturbed surfaces, where there may be earlier evidence of humans we didn't realize were already here.
And Clovis was recognized by the 1950s as the earliest well-recognized assemblage. There's also artifact assemblages called Western Stemmed in the Great Basin that are probably some as old as Clovis. But then this raised the question of immediately, of course, was there anybody here before Clovis? And that debate's been going on since the 1950s. And it's a endless debate, acrimonious debate at times. There are good reasons why this is that I won't get into. This debate persists, but it is one of the great debates in American archaeology. And also, we're dealing with the last major human migration in human prehistory, the peopling of the Americas, much later, of course, than in Europe and elsewhere. Now, what we've got at White Sands, locality 2, as you have now seen from David and Matthew, unequivocal evidence of people walking around. For me, that has been a tremendous relief. We don't have to argue about broken stones or broken bones. Human footprints, unequivocal. There's no doubt, lots of them. It's astonishing to see this on top of this astonishing record of megafauna. White Sands down here, the oldest in this group, and there are other sites, but I think these are probably the best cases in North America. This is particularly significant because the White Sands locality is the same age as the glaciers, the maximum extent of glaciers across North America. As most of you are probably aware, you've had these cycles of ice growth and decay, and 23 to 25,000 is when you had the last cycle of ice growth, and you had glaciers essentially from coast to coast covering all of Canada. This is a generalized map, but it shows you the ice coverage. There was an ice sheet over the Canadian Rockies, smaller one, and then a large one, and they would grow and merge and completely cover Canada for a while. And this is a map at probably right at the end of the age range for the end, as far as we know it, for the White Sands locality. And so that site is very clearly occupied by humans at the same time that the part of the continent is completely covered. So that raises a lot of questions about how did people get to New Mexico and when relative to this situation? In my last slide here, this is a textbook illustration showing the peopling of the Americas as the ice sheet shrank. And when Clovis arrived and the other groups arrived, showing various routes through the glaciers as they retreated or around the glaciers. But you can also work this the other way, because the glaciers grew out of these centers. So 100,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, there was essentially no glacial ice covering Canada. But then as climate change, you started growing the glaciers and sea levels started going down. But there was probably some several tens of thousands of years when you could get from Asia into the Americas and get around or through the glaciers before the last glacial maximum. So this is an argument that we've put out that possibly we're seeing a population that had been in place for some time, which makes the whole issue of the peopling of the New World, pushes it back even farther. So, I mean, the site is so significant for so many reasons. And this is yet another one of the reasons why we're interested in it.
Site. All right, before he goes on, I'm going to rewind it back. But the doc that was talking, let me go ahead and wind it back a little bit. All right, so this guy here who was talking, you remember he did bring up acrimony. Sometimes these discussions on who peopled the Americas first before Clovis, the element of acrimony or bitterness and resentment towards, I guess, the facts that some people may have because of whatever reason. We all know the reason. That's the elephant in the room. But that acrimony comes about because I guess they feel that these people should not have this claim to fame or this claim on their quote unquote mantle, because just think about it. These people, these melanated people, were at the very bottom of South America. They were all the way in Kamchatka, Russia. They were all the way on the, let's see where Australia's at, the farthest part of Eastern Australia. So I mean, you can see where that acrimony or resentment may come into play at. And they were in Europe too. So yeah, the acrimony is real. But it's up to us to know this stuff. We can't let people that have resentment against the originals teach, because they're not going to teach you correctly. They're going to try to control your mind. And then I always say, like, if you keep someone ignorant, you can deceive that person on who they are, you know, what they are, who do they stem from. You can say that they never had a history. They don't come from anything. They come from people that don't have a history. You can say that to them and have people feeling that way, but you have to know who you are. But let's go ahead and go forward.
The site is so significant for so many reasons, and this is yet another one of the reasons why we're interested in it.
Sites like White Sands and Santa Elena and Serra de Capivara show clear and incontrovertible evidence of human occupation in the Americas far, far before Clovis. These various ancient sites, predating even the mutations on that OCA2 gene responsible for light skin amongst East Asian peoples.
Take note of this, because this is very important right here. Let me rewind it back a little bit. What is it at 2742? All right, let's go.
Occupation in the Americas far, far before Clovis. These various ancient sites, predating even the mutations on that OCA2 gene responsible for light skin amongst East Asian peoples. These sites being occupied tens of thousands of years before the rapid expansion of Mongoloid peoples during the Holocene. In fact, at the time when people were living at White Sands, that typical Mongoloid phenotype had not even become widespread in East Asia yet, with several remains from China and Japan dating back some 20,000 to 12,000 years ago, still having that distinctive Negroid, Sub-Saharan, or Australo-Melanesian phenotype.
Man, I tell you, this is why they want to suppress information, man. And you know what? They've actually been doing that. Before we even get to the entertainment portion, the scholastic world, the arena where we learn that our education, the people that I guess are gatekeepers who conduct these digs right here. I mean, you had a lot of people who were dishonest about it, man. But you had a select few who were honest, but they were outnumbered, man. They were outnumbered, so it's crazy, man.
That same ancestral phenotype from Africa. Ancient remains of these Negroid East Asians be found in sites such as the Zhoukoudian Cave near Beijing. As Professor Holliday stated, these early African migrants would have arrived in the Americas 50 to 100,000 years ago, before the closing of the ice corridor and the start of the Ice Age and the last glacial maximum.
But you can also work this the other way, because the glaciers grew out of these centers. So 100,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, there was essentially no glacial ice covering Canada. But then as climate change, you started growing the glaciers and sea levels started going down. But there was probably some several tens of thousands of years when you could get from Asia into the Americas and get around or through the glaciers before the last glacial maximum. So this is an argument that we've put out that possibly we're seeing a population that had been in place for some time, which makes the whole issue of the peopling of the New World, pushes it back even farther.
All right, so hey, that's a female right there. All right, so he's about to make a really great point, and these are people who question the validity of what they're hearing. You know, I mean, you got all this evidence, and some people will still be like, I'm still gonna be a skeptic just because. But check out the point that he makes right here, coming up.
These early out-of-Africa populations would prosper in the Americas for millennia, until about 14,000 years ago. With the end of the last glacial maximum, we would see yet another migration into the Americas. These peoples would be the more Mongoloid, Northeast Asian populations we usually identify with Native American populations. Just as in South Asia and regions of Austromelanesia, we would see these two populations side by side. Today in these regions of Asia, we can still see it, these much older Negroid populations, side by side with the more recent Mongoloid migrants who moved into these regions at the very end of the Neolithic. In the Americas, these Mongoloid and Negroid populations would mix, and throughout the Americas, we can find both of these distinct skeletal morphologies side by side in certain sites. But it should be known, these Paleolithic African migrations were not the last migration of Africans into the American continent. And in fact, some of these Mongoloid populations would in fact have African populations amongst them. As we know, during the Neolithic, the Sahara, which today is a barren desert, was lush and green, which led to massive movements out of Africa into new regions of Eurasia. These Africans would bring pottery, agriculture, and urbanism to several new regions of Eurasia. But they wouldn't stop there. They would also migrate deeper into East Asia, as well as into the Americas. As we know, throughout Europe, the Levant, and Asia, it is common to find the remains of ancient African individuals, many of them bearing the ancestral African Y chromosomes, such as A, B, BT, CT, and various E lineages, as well as possessing those distinctive Africoid or Negroid features. The remains of these ancient Africans found everywhere from Spain to India. So, just as we find multiple remains of Africans throughout these regions, we also find them in the Americas as well. This ancient African connection is most likely the cause of many of the shared cultural traits that are found between the Americas and Africa. Of course, the most striking is the use of pyramids, as well as the intentional use of mummification. The oldest mummy in Africa is a small black boy found in the Green Sahara, dated to over 6,000 years ago, 1,000 years before the first mummies in Egypt. And of course, we find mummies in the Americas that are thousands and thousands of years old. The oldest mummies of the Americas were of the culture of the Chinchorro of southern Peru and Chile. Some of these mummies are 7,000 years old. The Chinchorro people were expert fishermen. Their lives were revolving around the lakes and rivers of Southern America. Not surprisingly, the first stone-building civilization is also in South America, not far from the Chinchorro. These were the people of Norte Chico. The people of Norte Chico built the first urban centers in the Americas, as well as the first step pyramids. These were a completely peaceful people with no indication of warfare and ritual use of psychedelics. So, just as we find the remains of ancient Africans throughout the Mediterranean, the Levant, and India, we also find the remains of these ancient Africans in the Americas. Dated to between 3,972 BC and 3,806 BC, the remains of this ancient mummified African, not surprisingly, can be found amongst the Chinchorro, the oldest mummifiers of the Americas.
All right, take a screenshot of this if you want to.
In their ancestral heartland of Arica, in Chile, this ancient African mummified individual bore Y haplogroup E1B1A1 A1C2C3C. This E1B1 lineage, of course, originates in Western Africa and is found commonly amongst Niger-Congo peoples of the African continent. We also find African individuals dated to between 4,310 BC and 3,940 BC. This ancient African individual residing in Neolithic Canada. This individual carried the ancestral African Y haplogroup, haplogroup A, now found in the dense tropical regions of the African continent. This deep-rooted African Y chromosome being synonymous with sub-Saharan Africa. We also find another pre-Columbian mummy, dated to over 1,000 years ago. This mummy was found near Chihuahua, Mexico, and carried the African Y chromosome CT. And not surprisingly, we also find several other pre-Columbian individuals bearing these African A, CT, BT, and E lineages throughout the Americas, and even in other regions of Asia, speaking to the large spread of African migrants during the age of the Green Sahara and the Neolithic Revolution.
So where did all these black people go? Where did all these Africans go to? Where are the Paleo-Americans that first migrated here from Africa during the Paleolithic?
All right. So people that have a beef with the FBA or ADOS, I mean, listen, this is not a war type of thing. You know, we just got to have respect on both sides. Now, if you're from the continent of Africa, and if you're one of those UK Africans who don't really get it, oh, man, y'all, we're all black. Nah, man. You got to understand divergence time. You have to understand that, I mean, just listen to him. Don't take my word for it. Here we go.
Where are the African migrants that came here during the Neolithic? If we have all these genetics and skulls and skeletal remains, where did all these black people go to? They're here. I'm one of them. A lot of African Americans are descended from these ancient African groups. For example, this is my Ancestry.com, and of course I'm black, but I'm also 5% Native American. This is on my mother and father's side. This is me and my sister's friend Julie. And me and my sister share a birthday, so this is Julie mushing up my sister's face on our birthday. And Julie is Mexican, obviously. And her dad's Mexican. And he's a really cool cat, real funny guy. And he recently did a DNA test. And he was 40% African. 40%. Both West and East African. Which is typical for African Americans. Because, you know, they're not usually just from one region of Africa. But Julie's dad doesn't look black at all. He's a just a regular looking Mexican guy. But he has a very high percentage of African ancestry. That's more than certain Afro-Mexicans or even Afro-Latinos who look more, like me. So I'm saying all this just to illustrate how in the Americas, we're all mixed up. We're all mixed together. And a lot of this mixing happened before Europeans even arrived. We already lived on this continent together before the era of colonization. When the Americas were colonized, the first people that were enslaved were Native Americans. Over 5.5 million Native Americans were enslaved during the era of colonization. During that time, of course, people were brought over from Africa as well. If you were a Native American of African ancestry, you were just put with the other Africans and then labeled as colored or Negro. And this goes for North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean. A lot of those people in those areas are descended from those Paleo-Americans that first migrated from Africa 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, as well as African migrants that came here during the Neolithic. A lot of people are descended from those ancient populations. They just don't know it. Why is that? Because, unless you study pre-Columbian American archaeology, you've probably never heard of any of the stuff I've covered in this video. Who the heck knows about HTLV1 or, these genomes? I didn't even cover things like sickle cell. A lot of ancient Native Americans had sickle cell, which of course originates in Western Africa. So a lot of this stuff is not exactly hidden, but people don't usually talk about it. So, why would you know about it? But, thankfully with all of the research, all of the new archaeological finds, all of the new sites, great archaeologists like Nevis, like Guidon, who have always said the first Americans were black people from Africa, they've been totally proven right over the last, couple years. And eventually, even if I were to do it myself, there will be documentaries about the first Americans, and they will be black people, and that will mean a lot to, a lot of kids in the Americas, whether they be in Caribbean or whether they be in Compton. Seeing the first Americans as black people will mean a lot to a lot of people. So, yeah, that's the end of that video. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys enjoyed the video, please, drop a donation.
Hey, you know what, man? I'm definitely going to donate because this dude, he did a lot of thorough work. Made my job much, much, much easier. Hey, I would prefer just to react off of his work right here, rather. I mean, I have the ability to find the information, but it would have took much longer. But my reactions to him sped up a lot of things, man. And I do have some books, some sources that do speak on this subject. It gives descriptions of, I guess, during the colonial period. Was it Volney? Not Volney, but, I have some pre-colonial American books, and I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I can't find a book right now because, I'm doing this video presentation, but I definitely have some descriptions of a guy. He had his journal and he was just writing down what some of these natives look like. And the guy said that some of these tribes, they look no different than what he saw in Africa. So, I mean, that's that. I'm a long ways away from the Americas, but with that said, not everybody who claims to be FBA are majority Indian or Paleo American or melanated American. Of course we know some Africans came over here, not in the numbers that they purport, but there's an element that I'm trying to I am establishing, but a lot of people in the Americas, they don't want to hear that melanated European aspect. A lot of people have that in their gene pool. Anyway, this was all about establishing the Paleo melanated Americans. So that's all. I think I did that. So we've reached that point in my video presentation where I give my final thoughts. And remember, this is a teaching moment. There is no disrespect given or intended at all. So conceptually speaking, we want to avoid being simple-minded or have that simple viewpoint. and have the appropriate three-dimensional outlook on things, or something close to three-dimensional outlooks. Now, I want to speak on the surface level divergence time. That OOA is the out of Africa migration, and that slide on your screen has out of Africa to the Levant, okay, out of Africa to Europe, all right. Then I have out of Africa to East Asia with a question mark, only because those migrations are not direct, because you have time in between where, okay, out of Africa, then they settled to the Levant, and they spent time in the Levant before a branch moved off and went to Asia, went to Sunderland, and went to the Americas. So it's not a direct migration there. That's a concept that we should get, right? Now, in the event that you don't grasp what I am saying when it comes to surface level divergence time, this slide explains everything. According to the migration patterns, the out of Africa to the Americas wasn't a direct one, and there were several long layovers in between. We're talking a millennia or more as the first AMH, anatomically modern humans, out of Africa to the Levant, then Central Asia, then to East Asia, then to Sunderland, then to the Americas. And don't forget about the European continent either, that migration. So this shouldn't be taken in the wrong way, but the divergence of time between Africans and melanated indigenous folks of the Americas has more length to it than Australian Aboriginals and melanated folks of the Americas, because they don't have that lengthy layover in between. You understand? Now, when you speak on this subject, we have to know that there's going to be gray area. So let's examine that gray area. So here's a concept for you guys. Let's start in the 1700s. Now, we know that the melanated Aboriginals of the Americas, that divergence time was shorter between them and the people of classic Sunderland when in comparison to the Africans and the melanated Aboriginal Americans during that time. So it's definitely not a slight or a slur to call or refer to Africans as our distant cousins, because we are still acknowledging some type of bond. It's just that the divergence time between us has created some separation between us, where new cultures have morphed and came up, new languages, new names, new whatever you want to think of, that has actually happened. Even though there may be some derivatives of the original culture that they stem from, but you know, it's been watered down and new things were created during that separation. So I have to say again, using that concept of the family tree and the actuality of divergence of time, those Africans in the 1700s and those melanated indigenous peoples are basically distant cousins about the time they came in contact with one another again. And speaking of family tree, I have a cousin family tree slide on here, and let's just look at it. And of course you can see great grandparent, then the generations. Let's liken generations to millennia. So there's generations in between the greats and the parents, even the grandparents. Let's treat generations and millennia as the same thing, just metaphorically speaking. So I mean, Africans are kind of like basically, you know, that third, fourth, fifth cousin once removed. Every migration, like I say, they spent millennia in that before a branch broke off and went to the next section. So Africa to the Levant, then Africa to Asia. I mean, you still got a Levantine culture that is getting watered down while they're in Asia. Then pretty soon they create their own Asian culture. Then they break off and move somewhere else to Sunderland, then finally to the Americas. So I mean, it's very different. That's all I'm getting at there. So we can all be for real about this. We can be adults and sensible about these things. Geographic distance, it played a role in the deviations, along with other groups of people coming onto the scene and living amongst these melanated original peoples of these certain lands, Europe, Asia, the Near East, Levant area, Americas, as you've seen already in Above the Clouds presentation. Now, I have to really point this out, that Africans, they weren't as divided from the people of the Levant and Southern Europe during that time. The melanated aboriginals of the Americas, they also weren't as close to the people of Sunderland and melanated Asians enough to be considered the same people, despite the divergence time being short. Now, I'll make another presentation later in regards to the melanated people of the Americas, which we all know are the modern day Canada, US, Caribbean, Central, and South America, because there's an unspoken kinship there that the majority of the people, the melanated people of this world, don't really know about. And the people who control the narrative, they won't speak of. That happened in the colonial period. Let's just say, let's say 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. That, we know the Americas were a dumping ground. And I'm gonna just stop right there because I don't want to give too much away. But if you know, you know. Check the surnames. That's all I will say. Those are your names. All right, so let's close it out. I got something for you guys. You ever been to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in the ATL? Well, you're going from Concourse T to A. This is what you'll see right here. You see this little sculpture or figurine that was made. This is Native American. And just check out and see what it says. Now, let's go to the good portion here. You see this little mural or painting here. You see the individuals right there. They putting the truth right in our face, man. I mean, I don't want to be, I don't want to speak like I got some, ancient hidden knowledge or something. It's just right in front of us, man. But we don't put two and two together, man. So with all the information that you've taken in on this presentation, this is a nice segue to close it out. You see what these people are? And then look at that quotable right there. They will vanish like vapor. Their history will, you get it. So, I mean, you've seen they've done a really good job of doing that. So I'll go more in depth. I haven't even started the Native American or Paleo American video presentations yet. So I got to really put things together. I got sources on it, but I have to just organize everything. So this is the closeout. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you guys later. Take care.